Hello, everyone. Welcome to our most recent episode of the Current Review podcast. Today, we have an exciting guest on. His name is Ricky Roy, and he runs the YouTube channel 2-Bit Da Vinci. But besides that, Ricky has an extensive history in engineering, and you graduated from UC Berkeley with a mechanical engineering degree, and you've worked in the defense industry and software engineering. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. So very rich history there. And we also met at a beach dinner in Vietnam. So I guess this was a very odd event. So could you kind of walk us through your history in just your career, starting from being an engineer to being at this strange event in Vietnam where we were on the beach eating dinner?
Yeah, that's so funny, Andrew. I told my wife who I was chatting with, and she instantly remembered you, so that you were memorable enough to be remembered, which is always it's a good metric, I think.
That's good.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I started off in aerospace engineering. I was a flight controls and landing gear engineer for the FA-18 fighter jet program for the Navy. And that was a really fun job, really amazing, dynamic. I got to do a lot of travel, and I learned a lot about myself and kind of what I wanted to do with my career. And then when the iPhone came out in 2000, well, it came out in 2007, but the App Store came out with iOS 2. And the thought of like being able to make my own application just sounded so amazing that I went out and bought a MacBook and started teaching myself software. Did that for about 10 years. And basically the same thing was with YouTube. It was, the idea that you could just make your own videos, publish it, and have a platform, which I find that fascinating. The democratization of technology is one of my favorite things about the internet. I know the internet can be a crazy place, but that part of it is truly amazing. And same thing in 2017, I started a YouTube channel, covered some various things, and eventually I realized that there was a kind of a hunger for sustainability. I made a video about my solar panels 5 years later, shared the data, how much energy I had made and how much money I saved, and all the numbers of 5 years of data gathering. And that video did really well. It was my first like breakout video, and it kind of gave me a sense of what I should focus on. And yeah, it's been 7-8 years later, I do this full time. I've been full time on YouTube since 2021. And being a full-time YouTuber comes with some really interesting, quirky things. Like, the job is to come up with your own unique, interesting ideas and keep some kind of a cadence. But every so often, you'll get these like just insane opportunities. Andrew and I first met in person. I think I've seen some of the stuff you've written and stuff, but I think we met in person for the first time in Vietnam, like you mentioned, at a really over-the-top 1 week. Overseas, they call them KOLs, key opinion leaders. Here we call them influencers, but it was like an influencer event with VinFast that's, trying to make a name for themselves and basically fast track themselves into the psyche of car buyers and build cars. So that was a really fun event, incredibly over the top, incredibly memorable. I remember that trip. I've been on many trips since then, but that probably is hard to top. Do you remember, by the way, when we first got there, they took our passports?
Yes,
And as
I
an
do remember that.
As an American, that is unheard of. I have never given anybody my passport ever. But like, such is the power of VinFast in Vietnam that we land on a chartered flight and they take our passports and they're like, there's a bit of a language barrier as well. They're like, don't worry, we'll give it back to you in the hotel. And we like skirt customs because we had already gotten our visas. We were all stamped. They do all the paperwork and take us right away to our hotel room. No customs, no waiting. And in our hotel room, our passports found their way back to us. So yeah, that is a very influential company in Vietnam.
Yes, that was a little nerve-wracking at first when they took our passports, but then just like, and especially if you mentioned just like the whole like scope and breadth of the trip, like the fact that we basically migrated all the way down from northern Vietnam to southern Vietnam. They all chartered a plane for us to fly on from northern Vietnam. It was insane. But on the plus side, so the first VF8s had some issues. And I think, Ricky, you actually pointed out some of the issues I was noticing as well, like with the throttle mapping. And this was interesting because like a lot of other journalists did not really that wasn't even on their minds. And I remember you specifically asked like, throttle mapping and all those questions just on like the powertrain. And maybe that comes from you driving a Tesla as well. But yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
Definitely.
It's interesting, that journey that sort of took you all the way to Vietnam and in this weird place and to test out these cool vehicles. I followed you, and I think you did something pretty interesting with Matt Farrell, another YouTuber, Undecided with Matt Farrell, called Vice Versa, talking about cool topics a while ago. I'm just curious of like, what where was that in your journey of becoming a full-time YouTuber, and how is that helpful, sort of collaborating with other creators in this space as you guys try to find that unique voice and stand out?
Yeah, so Matt and I are like best friends, and we've been best friends for many, many years now. We talk all the time, and we have a Discord together where we talk about YouTube, and our channels have always covered similar topics. And early on, when I first went full time, that was the first time I'd worked for myself, and that was a bit of a struggle. Like learning to time manage took me a while. There's a lot to be learned there, and you got to respect entrepreneurs because it is a completely different animal. But Matt and I kind of talked about the same companies or thought about the same things. And we started a podcast, which was a lot of fun. The challenge there was that early on, I think the time management was difficult. And, a podcast is a little bit of prep work, obviously, beforehand. And then we, made a pretty quick video edit in terms of like how much work we put into it. But the being consistently available is very difficult. Like one of the hardest things for me is just schedule. Like with these trips, like you mentioned, one week you're in Vietnam, the next week I'm at a fully charged show in London. And I have a very hard time keeping to any kind of a schedule. So my core philosophy is I'm always working unless a friend of mine is doing something cool, in which case I'll always be there. And when there's nothing else going on, I just work. And it's hard to predict when that could be. So Monday through Friday and Saturday, Sunday mean very little to me. I also have children, so there's a lot of balancing and stuff, but being consistent with like a week of the day or an hour of the, it's kind of tough, and it is what it is.
Well, I mean, I think it's starting to pay off with some really cool recent videos that I've seen, like the EV NASCAR one. I think was super interesting. And then Andrew was talking about you covered something with the chemical spill in Ohio, and I'm just curious of how do you pick and decide what topics do you pursue, and how much time and effort do you put into these videos, from it like a review video, be it, or an explainer video?
That is a great question. And the answer to that has varied over the years. We've struggled to like really find what we want to do exactly. And part of it is because I'm a very broad person. Like I listen to all kinds of music. I'll watch football one day and the next thing I'm reading a book, or like I'm into a lot of things, which is not good for YouTube. YouTube really wants you to be one thing. Like if you're Dungeons and Dragons, Dungeon Master, and you just make videos about that one thing. If you go and make a video about how to make macadamia chocolate chip cookies, it'll do very poorly. And so YouTube really wants you to like focus in, which I think you guys are probably doing a better job of. So we've struggled with that. The other thing as well is we used to spend way too much time on an episode. So research and writing, I have a researcher as well. He's a chemistry professor. The two of us, probably 3-4 days of research and writing. And then the video edit normally takes about 4 days as well. So if you take over a week of multiple people's time and you have a dud, it's really bad for business on YouTube. Our most recent video that I did, it's this new model. You can kind of see I have a new setup. We have like the audio and video like feeding right into one machine. So when you hit done, everything's together. There's no synchronizing. And we're trying to make videos in a daily format. So imagine if on any given day, if the chemical spill in Ohio or Ocean Gate or whatever, if something happened, that I could make an episode about it in like 24 hours. That was kind of the goal. So we've shifted over the years, and I think I've been very stubborn. Like I had this idea of what I wanted to make, and at this point in my life and my career in the pursuit of mental health, I've accepted that I think there's a certain thing that YouTube wants for me and the viewers as well, right? So I'm just going to give it to them and try to focus on relevant information. And my wife always says what she watches me for, what she likes that I do the most, is bringing like an engineering context to what's happening in the world. And that's a pretty good formula for being relevant and, hitting that wave of the algorithm. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing going forward.
Interesting. Because I know you did that really well, at least with the Ocean Gate submarine, because that video was like, I think I wasn't even signed into YouTube, so I didn't have any of my subscribers in my feed. And your video was #1 trending on the Ocean Gate sub. But I think that is a really good point you made, just getting that engineering perspective into these current events. But for you, how do you, so you said you have a researcher who helps you out as well, but it's like some of these topics are just so far apart from each other. And I assume it has to be, there's going to be a lot of research that gets done just to be able to cover these topics with authority.
Yeah, that's right. The fact that they're so apart from each other is part of our problem, which is why like our views are very, like, if you look at Matt Farrell's numbers, Matt is much more disciplined. He's a little bit older than me, and he has much more wisdom than I do for sure. But his views are very, there's a nice tight band, and there's a kind of a clarity and conciseness to what he covers. For me, I think the fascinating part is that one day, like my favorite trip last year was probably the Panama Canal. I got to go there. I spent like 2 or 3 days watching operations at the Miraflores locks. And I came home and I made an episode about like how they save, 100 million gallons of water a day, this whole system that they have. It's one of my favorite videos, right? It didn't perform particularly well, but that has no bearing on some heat pump or solar or some EV, and they're wildly different. So from a day-to-day business or research perspective, that's what for me makes this the dream job. Is one day I'm learning about, some disaster or how some new technology works or trying to understand something. And I can just keep having completely different things to get into, which for me in my mind, I love that. But the business side of me is like, okay, I'd rather get some like consistent views and some good growth, make some money and not lose any more of my hair over the constant turbulence that is YouTube. So that is a bit of a thing I have to juggle.
Like you were talking about research and balancing and like to me, I find storytelling really interesting. It's particularly on YouTube. It's really, I think, refined a way that a storyteller tells a story, especially like really complicated and technical issues. And I love your sort of tag on Engineer's Guide to the Galaxy. So you're allowed to be somewhat technical, but I find that most people, especially on the internet, don't care that much. Like they're actually quite shallow. And I think you had heard us talking about how shallow people can be, particularly in the comments and whatnot. So how do you determine how deep to go and what's too deep or deep enough,
Man, that's such a really, really good question. And the reason is, if you look at our comments, we have like, I have PhDs that watch our videos and they'll make the most nuanced corrections, or they'll kind of go, well, to add to what he said here, here's the blank. And it's like, holy crap, this guy spent like 20 years of his life, in this field. So I have really, really deep thinkers. That's what I love about YouTube above all platforms, right? If you make a 20-minute video on X or Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn, whatever, the people are there to go, cool, like, and then move on. Like no one's watching it, in my opinion. Like I can't imagine. But on YouTube, you get these guys that really want to nerd out about battery chemistry, right? Or talk about how much energy AI is going to consume, or like projecting X, Y, or Z. There's really deep thinkers on YouTube, which is what I love about it, which is why it's always been my premier platform. But I try to balance it out with how do you get, how do you keep your loyal fans happy? And then how do you have, not so deep as to alienate most people, because 1 in 100,000 people is ultra technical, like I would like to be. I mean, maybe 10,000. So if you want to get millions of views, you got to be able to appeal to a broad audience. And so I'll try to find that balance. And what I normally do is I'll make videos either for broader audiences or deep dives for my core hardcore fans. And I know those aren't going to do as well, but they're made for the people that have been with me for a long time. So it all comes down to kind of the strategy of balancing it. But it is a huge challenge for us. And we've kind of dialed it in different directions over the years, from more technical to more broad to varying levels of success. Because sometimes being too broad, you get one video with a lot of views, but that doesn't translate to any kind of growth, because those guys are just there for that one thing and they're gone. Whereas your core people keep coming back. And so everything about YouTube is a strategy. Seriously, just every second of your video, the topics, and it's one I'm still learning, to be sure.
Interesting. And so I know this is an EV and sustainable transportation related podcast, but I'm turning this now into more of a philosophical conversation, because I want to ask you, because you have a significant following on YouTube. Do you like read the comment sections? Because I'm sure there's people who may really disagree with your take on something, or some people really love it. Do you read the comments and do you take that feedback to heart?
So I think over the years, I read less comments just because, there's more of them. If I were to read all the comments, then I would never make another video for weeks at a time. I do read I'll browse the comments whenever I have time, and it requires a certain level of having thick skin, basically, because you will get some kind of nasty comments. But I will say, I've seen other people's videos, and I'll be honest, like when I first was on YouTube, I'm like this bald brown guy on YouTube. I'm probably gonna get crapped on. I think my comments are usually way better than other people's. I'm friends with some folks over on the Transport Evolved team, for example, like Nikki Gordon Bloomfield and her team. Her comments are sometimes really, really, it's very depressing how bad they are. And I think there's clearly people who, under the anonymity of the internet, feel that, they feel emboldened to be complete and utter jerks, and it is what it is. There's a little bit of a toxic culture with the internet, but I honestly feel like 98% of our comments are just really good. Or if they're critical, it's about the topic being discussed in a very academic fashion that's highly respectable. I love those. There's nothing better than a comment that makes me go, damn, I should really try to get into more of that on my next video and learn from it, because I learn a ton from the comments. So yeah, I'll watch them in the early hours, especially when like the more core people watch, and then I'll just kind of read it during the week. But I do kind of try to control it a little, because the artist and the comment sometimes should have a little bit of separation. Like my wife will read more of the comments than I do, because she doesn't care. Like she didn't sit there and write it and edit it and animate it, right? So she's like, yeah, screw you, or she'll fire back. But for the artist, like imagine if you had your art in a gallery, and you're gonna just sit there and be a fly on the wall and listen to what every person says about your art. That's not a good thing, honestly. There's probably a healthy balance, right? Like you make an EP, or you make a album if you're not a musician, and you put it out into the world and you kind of move on. If you listen to every comment and every critic, you probably stop doing it, because I mean, that's the nature of criticism. And so there's a healthy balance to strike out.
Yeah, I definitely think that is a good balance, because I, though to a much lesser extent than you, but like some of my LinkedIn posts do pretty well on electric cars. And it's like, I get like 150, 200 comments on a post, and my friends are like, they'll like text me. They're like, do you see the comments on your post? And I'm like, I just don't read them. Like, I just don't have time. And there's like these crazy wars going on. And I'm just sitting there. I'm like, I don't have any notifications on, so I don't see them. So I think that's kind of my approach. I just like pretend it doesn't exist, because I know there's going to be people who don't like it. But I would assume YouTube would be better, because at least that's assuming you're watching like a 20 to 30-minute video versus just a post, which you can interpret it however you want to.
Yeah, it's probably pretty similar, but yeah, I hear you. There's probably a little bit of a difference.
I mean, it's interesting. I like how you mentioned in terms of like there are some things for you to gain, right? And I think that's one of the very beneficial things about the internet and what it's done is it's been an open forum for actual productive discussions. I don't know if you think it's more positive leaning or negative leaning. I think a lot of people are worried about some of the threads and some of the things that social media has done to our society. But I'm curious, like, are you an overall techno optimist, would you say, or a techno pessimist, or still skeptical and still deciding?
I think I'm a techno optimist. I understand that not everything that we cover or we talk about will reach commercialization and be on the shelf for us to all enjoy. But I just love the fact that more and more brilliant people have more money on the table to research and develop more and more things. And that's kind of my favorite thing, is to cover the breakthrough little ideas, knowing that maybe 1 out of 10 of them actually will make it, but knowing that smart people are doing stuff. So I'm a major techno optimist.
I love it. I love it. I think we are too. That's why we love talking about EVs. And I think the future of transportation, we get really excited and hope that people can get excited as well, you know?
When did you start getting into EVs?
2017, 2016, 2017. My second breakout video was on the Tesla Model 3 battery pack, because by far the biggest question I got is, I'm not going to buy a car that I have to throw away in 2 years, because people, likened it to this and didn't figure that batteries would last. So I spent a month trying to learn as much as I could about the batteries, and I made a video. So 2017.
When did you get behind the wheel of an EV? Because you had a Model 3, I think, last time we spoke.
Yeah, I got behind the wheel probably around 2017 as well. I had a buddy who had a Model S, and then I had a cousin who bought a very early Model 3, and I bought mine in 2019.
Wow, that's pretty early on. Yeah, because I mean, especially because I got into EVs around that. I convinced my parents on a Model 3 in 2019. So kind of a similar time frame. And I mean, just from then to now, it's just seeing how much the EV industry has grown. Like literally your only options for like an affordable, and by affordable, I mean like the $40,000 range for an EV was like, it was like a Chevy Bolt, Nissan Leaf, or Tesla Model 3. And obviously the Model 3 was the best one of the bunch. But now it's like today, there's just so many more electric cars. So how have you been following the EV industry growing, and what are some insights you think you've gained from just witnessing this transition?
It's such a good point. There's more and more options, and I think we've completely changed into a new chapter where now the question is going to be about profitability. Like, can these companies actually make profit on these cars? Who will be around? Who will do it best? So, early on, it was kind of like the Jaguar I-Pace, for example, which was actually kind of a cool car. But everybody was thinking, okay, I know, I'll make one EV. Never even thinking about profitability. It wasn't really hard, like, core to their thinking. But now every car company is really trying to figure out, like, how can we be profitable with this stuff? Because they're struggling with that. A lot of the car companies have this like decision to make about like how much they want to invest in what's coming up at the cost of, potentially disappointing shareholders at the next quarterly earnings call. And so it's a really unenvious position to be in when you have a legacy business that you disrupt for what comes next. And it's why, Rivian, Lucid, and Tesla, who have no such baggage, can just go full speed ahead on all that comes next. I think I'm cautiously optimistic, and I do think that there are more and more good cars out there. I got a chance to drive the Hyundai Ioniq 5N at the Hyundai Ioniq 9 event. It is a super cool car, really, really fun. I'm just glad that thing exists in the world, and I think it's a good car. But I was reading some reports about like battery pack replacements for like 50 grand. And these companies still have a lot to figure out. And that's really what's going to happen now. It's not going to be about features and look at this open trunk and this and that. It'll just be like pure engineering and manufacturing and nailing some of the fundamentals.
Yeah, interesting. And I think with the engineering, that's a huge thing because this summer I interned at Lucid Motors, and there it's like just the core of the company. It was just good engineering, and you really kind of see it get brought out into their products. And you kind of see that more, I'd say, with the startups as opposed to legacy automakers. I know there's some better legacy automaker EVs out, like the Equinox EV and all these. But where do you kind of see the placement of these startups like Rivian, Tesla? I guess we can't really call Tesla a startup anymore, but still newer company compared to these legacy automakers in the US.
I think Lucid Engineering is fantastic, by the way. Like, for example, they really invest a lot in being vertically integrated and making everything themselves, which kind of flies in kind of the face of traditional legacy auto for a long time. I'm thinking about making an episode that'll be coming out soon, talking about how like a lot of the parts or features you see in a car, for example, the automatic high beam on a car comes from a little module that sits kind of on top near your rear view mirror. And it has a little sensor. Some of them have cameras, some of them are like light sensors, combination of both. And then a little microprocessor on board that does the math to figure out if there's a car or tail light and to go back to low beam, right? That's how these other companies do it. It's like, let ABC Electronics make that gizmo, and I'll just buy them by the hundreds of thousands at, $5 or $20, whatever it is, and put them in my car. Same thing goes for like blind spot monitoring, right? Most cars have that little dot that shows up. That's another part you have to buy from somebody. You stick in your mirrors, adds to like the unit cost of a car. Tesla has none of that. When they shipped their car, it didn't have auto high beams. It didn't have blind spot monitoring. It didn't have cross traffic alert. It didn't have that feature that they just rolled out where you open the door and there's a car coming really quick. It'll alert you and not open it the first time and warn you that something was coming. Those are all features that were not there when that car was sold, but they've been added. And they were added through new software using existing hardware. So just the cameras, right? If you use the camera feed in front, you can tell when there's a taillight or a headlight, and you can do the auto high beam feature. And a lot of these features are really crappy, by the way. Like the auto high beam for the Tesla was unusable and atrocious when it first came out. But then fast forward 6 months and all of a sudden it's bulletproof and like just as good as any other car I've ever driven. So I think startups have an interesting perspective. Like when you have to either develop a part or go to the parts bin, you kind of start to think, well, if we shape this a little bit differently, we wouldn't need that part. We could do it another way, like, simplify and reduce complexities. Whereas, traditional makers have this kind of supply chain. They have this order already in place to buy that gizmo for the auto high beam that goes up on top of the rearview mirror, and they could save money by adding to that order. And so they just keep buying the same parts that they've kind of historically done. And that's kind of the nature of disruption and startups in general, is you have the flexibility to kind of reimagine because you have nothing else. Like, you haven't done anything before. You haven't already bought parts or products, and it allows you to rethink. So that's where like Rivian and Lucid clearly, I mean, I have a simple rule. Look at the frunk of a car. If your frunk is not very good, your engineering is just not good enough. You should go back to the drawing board and try again. Teslas are fantastic. Rivian is even better. The Rivian obviously is better. It's a big SUV. I could sleep in the Rivian frunk. And the Lucid one for a small, like in a Mercedes E-Class size car, is massive. Those are car companies that reimagined how this thing is put together in the pursuit of this feature, compared to like I can put my phone and AirPods in the frunk of many of the EVs that I drive. And in my mind, it's just not good enough. Like, you're not going to sell very many of these, and you're going to get butthurt because your sales aren't good. You're not profitable. But in my opinion, you got to go back to the drawing board and really try, because in a world where the Model 3 and the Model Y exist, you have to be great, because those two cars are among the two of my favorite cars on for sale at any price point. So you have to be better than them. Otherwise, why would anyone buy yours, right?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the front trunk, and I wanted to share my screen real quickly because I made this post on LinkedIn about I was reviewing the BMW i4. Great car, by the way. But underneath the front, you have all this empty space. I'm not logged in, so I can't click on it. But you can basically put it back in the front trunk area of this BMW i4. And it just kind of blew my mind that they wouldn't at least like put a plastic tray in there or something. And I mean, sure, it uses a shared platform with an internal combustion engine vehicle, but like also the Volvo C40 and Volvo XC40, which one's gas powered, one's electric, they both share the same platform and they have a front trunk. And I saw that and I'm just like, that's just so ridiculous. It's like, you got all this space up here. You have this massive hood that looks great, by the way, but it's like, it's just this gaping hole in there. And it's just like, they're like, we don't really need that.
Yeah, it's such a missed opportunity, right? So my first EV was a Model 3 Performance 2020, and I love that car. And it was an amazing road tripper because obviously the supercharger network, but also we would put our travel stroller for the kids in the front. And then in the back, you have that subfloor section that can take a carry-on bag. So a stroller and a carry-on bag is already in place before I've used up any trunk space, right? Then you got your bags, my wife's stuff and the kids' stuff and everything else. And we did trips in a sedan that, normally you would need a much bigger car to do. So that room matters. And if you have it, why not use it? Like the Lucid Air, the Gravity, I'm sure as well. I haven't really seen that in person yet. But Lucid Air is a packaging marvel. Like, they've taken a car and been like, all right, without this huge gas engine, let's stretch everything out and prioritize interior space. And it shows, right? There's a lot to be gained.
For sure. I think it's really interesting in terms of like rethinking and reimagining what a vehicle could be and how people could use it. And I think that's one of the exciting things about EVs. And I think you're right in that, like, an EV is really traditionally like a very different car. It's almost like a computer on wheels. And the way that these new companies, like native companies, have taken it is almost like a computer on wheels where you can upgrade it with OTAs. I've heard a lot about like cell phone company Xiaomi creating a really great EV. And, Apple had the Apple Car project, I think is now dead, which is a bit of a shame. What do you think about maybe phone makers or, non-car companies, but tech companies here in the US experimenting with getting into the EV space or partnering up with some of the traditionals to reimagine what a vehicle could be?
It's hard to imagine tech companies building cars. That would have never happened in the internal combustion era. Not unless you license an engine from Toyota or something. But with EVs, yeah, it becomes much more of a platform that you have to build out. I think there's a future where we'll have new companies like Xiaomi and some of these tech companies, but it is still hard to reach a level of manufacturing scale. One of the sad stories of the year for me was the Fisker Ocean. And first of all, I knew some people there's a guy in my neighborhood who has one. And they really liked it. And the people I've spoken with really like their cars. Lord knows what's going to happen to them now. Like, I don't know how you get it serviced or do anything if you need a part. But the reason it wasn't the design or the car, the reason I was really cheering for them was because, that manufacturing company called Magna actually built the car. And in my mind, they were kind of ushering in a new age where what if people with like clever visions or really great design languages and like good, design could build cars and then have a manufacturing company build it, because it is wildly expensive. I mean, how hard it's been for Rivian and Lucid, who are still in the high margin, low volume game right now, and they're losing money on every car that they sell. It's really expensive to build factories, in the tens of billions, and it is a tough road. And it's hard to imagine that every one of these companies is going to go invest 10 billion in a factory before they've even proven that they can sell cars or if they can figure it all out. So my hope is, if we start to get these platforms, like have you guys driven the Honda Prologue?
Not yet.
I've not driven it, but I've seen a couple of them on the road, and I think it's amazing that it's built on the Ultium platform.
Right.
Like
The
it
lease
does
deals are
not
great
look like
on
a
them
GM.
too.
Yeah. And we had an episode where we reviewed the numbers, and it's performing really well in the market. So
It's
I'm
actually
very, very happy about that. Yeah.
I forgot the exact sales number, but I think it's the third best-selling crossover or electric crossover in the United States. I think it's only behind the Mach-E, which is pretty impressive for the car just coming out this year.
I have a lot of, you guys probably can relate to this, but I have a lot of family and friends who will only buy like Japanese cars. Like, I'll buy a Honda or Toyota only, or a Lexus or whatever. And then of course, I mean, there's brand loyalty, but I've always believed in the gas car era, and I'll down this hill, the Japanese make the best cars. It's not close. The Germans make cool cars and sporty cars, but like in terms of reliability and like engineering, the Toyotas of the world are unrivaled, in my opinion, in terms of quality. So there are people who were waiting for something from Honda or Toyota. Now, the Toyota EV is really bad. There's no scenario where any human should ever buy it. It's just not good enough. It's not good enough at anything. I mean, it was a real failure. They should try again as well, make something better, more worthy of the badge of a Toyota. But Honda, most people don't even know that it's not a Honda. There's nothing Honda about it but the badging. And even the badging has that kind of electronic lowercase lettering, EV styling and stuff. But it just shows you how powerful that brand recognition is. I think I've never owned a GM product, and I can't imagine I ever would. It's just not for me personally. I actually think GM, if they could really get their manufacturing in line and propose this idea, they could make more money selling cars for other people than they can make for themselves. And that's an interesting world. I'd love to see more ideas, right? More concepts from different people with quirky ideas and stuff, and more options in the marketplace.
Yeah. And I think it's really crazy too how that car is that successful. So it's like third best-selling crossover in the United States. And it's selling alongside the Blazer EV, the Cadillac Lyriq, and the upcoming Cadillac Mystique. So you got 4 cars, and I think there's one more I'm missing, Acura ZDX as well. So you got these 5 cars on one platform, and the wheelbase is the same on all of them. Ground clearance is the same. Like, they're all fundamentally the same car, just different motors and battery options, but same platform. And that's just amazing that you can get 5 pretty successful cars on one platform. So I think they did a great job there. And I think that might be indicative of where strategy is going to come in the future on different automakers. Because especially you see like Honda, they don't have a lot of EV R&D, and it makes a lot of sense to partner with GM.
But potentially early on. I think it depends on how much you believe in it, right? The very first Honda SUV, I think it was the Passport, was actually a Isuzu. It was an Isuzu Rodeo here in the US, and they rebadged it. And the reason was Isuzu was a truck maker. They made trucks for the Japanese military, and Honda didn't believe in it. They weren't really convinced. And so like you get your toes wet by going, yeah, I'll put my badge on your car, make very little margin, and just kind of see. So hopefully this translates for a company like Honda should make their own. I think they would make an incredibly good car if they actually cared to, but it's a function of how much you believe in it. It kind of, to your point about the i4, how is BMW still sharing a platform with a gas car? Like, how little do you believe, and what will it take for you to like actually make a proper electric vehicle? Because I mean, there's going to be compromises. There's certain hard points in a chassis that you can't change, right? A hard point is like this engineering component that you can't move, or you have to deal with that constraint. And you have a lot more hard points if you share a chassis with a gas car than you do if you have a bespoke EV architecture.
Yeah. I mean, but that said, like I still think like the i4 is like it so happens to end up being a pretty good car. But
Yeah.
I guess yeah, and it's a very interesting thing because most automakers don't do that. Most like even Mercedes and Audi and all other German automakers are like, hey, here's our EV platform. We have this for the Porsche Taycan, etc. And then BMW is like, yes, we have the same platform for the gas-powered 4 Series and the electric one. And I think like there are some compromises as well because like the hard points you mentioned, and like there's a transmission tunnel in the back seat, and that takes up a lot of space. So I'm not a huge fan of that strategy, but I mean, it seems, and they have pretty decent sales. So at least for now, it seems to be working. But maybe in the next 5 years, when there's obviously going to be limitations there, how well is that going to prevail into the future?
Yeah, they've got their next generation, the new class, the new class platform that they're going to build out. But until then, I think they're going to do it this way. And you're right. I think the i4 is a really good car as well. I think it looks good and handles and performs and does all the right things in a BMW kind of way. So it's amazing how,
That
I mean, if they could do that now, just imagine, right? How good that will be.
I mean, that's where, like you said, it was sad that the Fisker Magna partnership kind of fell away, but maybe the Rivian Volkswagen partnership and Scout does really well. And it shows that maybe you'll see BMW partner with Lucid in a similar way, and they'll use their platform and EV architecture because I'm a big Rivian fan. I'm actually trading in my Gen 1 for a Gen 2, which I know on the surface doesn't look like there's a lot of changes, but I've followed along with they've done a massive number of changes internally to lessen the number of wires, and to your point, reimagine how can you build a car and rezone the controllers and that sort of thing. And that's the type of thinking I think that it's hard to replicate from an existing car company unless you partner up and you purchase their platform and basically just rebadge it from the surface, right?
Yeah. Do you have an R1T or an R1S?
I have a R1T, and actually I'm trading in for a Gen 2 R1S because I too have a son and a dog, and it's time that I grow up and get a family car.
I love both of them. The R1S is high on my list of next vehicles, but it'll be a while. Amazing car, and I agree. The version 2 updates are small, but they're very engineering focused, and it'll help them to be more profitable with each car in a big way.
Absolutely.
And as we're wrapping up this conversation, I think we have to ask the one big question of the episode for you, Ricky, is what are your like top 3 EVs that would be on your short list right now if you were going to be buying something?
R1S for sure. I had a chance to see the Hyundai Ioniq 9 as well. I like it a lot, but there's something about the R1S that just pulls at my heartstrings. I just love that car. Maybe it's the ethos of the company. So R1S for sure, because we need a big family hauler. Right now we have a third row Model Y, which works for the kids. Like it's a very occasional that we need it. But like if my mom and dad come to town, we can put the kids in the very back and we can all go in one car. But it's very tight.
Very
It won't
tight.
last
I tried to
forever.
fit back there before. It was tough.
Yeah, it's not really made for like a full size adult for sure. But it's a great feature and I love it in the Model Y. I'm glad we got it for kids in a pinch. That would be number one. I would love a Lucid Sapphire, I think would be on that list. I have a Model S Plaid, so that is it's hard to go up from there. I love that thing. I absolutely adore my car. Killer value. Teslas have become quite the value proposition. I mean, 1,000 horsepower, room for 5, 350 miles of range. I paid about 85,000 for it. So I think Sapphire, Lucid Sapphire, and 3,
It's got to be the Nissan Leaf.
the Nissan Leaf. Yeah, I want an old 2012 air cooled battery pack.
Make sure it's a blue one.
I always thought those were very quirky looking. I think the people that like the Prius like that about it. I'm a very classic design guy. Like I want great design, not quirky.
Would you go like super high end, like Rimac or something?
Yeah, I've seen one in person at a little Rimac event in Palm Springs one time. Never driven one, but that would make sense, right? I mean, I would love an electric sports car for sure. The MG Cyberster I think is really cool.
Yes.
We don't get that here, and I don't know why. Like, why don't we have a convertible? That's what BMW should do. Forget another sedan. Go make a E46 M3 kind of proportioned coupe and convertible electric vehicle. I think that would do really well. Maybe a
Yeah, because there's
maybe
really
what is it? The Tesla Roadster when it comes out, maybe. I would love that. So fun,
Yeah, because
fun,
the
fast
market
cars for
really,
sure.
yeah, because the market's really kind of dry on the electric convertible segment because I drove the Roadster this summer, the original Roadster, and I was like, it's so cool. And I'm like, I wish we could get something like that built today. Because I mean, even if you look at it, like if you could get like an electric Miata or something, I mean, you don't need a giant battery. It
Mhm.
probably shouldn't cost too much money. I think that would be pretty cool, especially if you get something like that in the $35,000 range.
Imagine like a Honda S2000E or something, right? I don't even know what you'd call it, but that long, kind of classic sports car proportions and rear wheel drive and electric. There's so many things. I think there's a general lack of creativity. Boxy crossover SUVs that I hate SUVs personally. I hate driving them. I'm a sports car person, but seemingly every new electric car is a freaking crossover SUV. Like, let's get creative and offer new stuff. The MX-5 electric, how cool would that be? I would have to shop that.
Yeah, that'd be pretty sick. But yeah, I don't know. I think the good thing is, at least now with diversification of platforms, getting just more vehicles out there, hopefully that will be in the future. Something small, convertible, maybe in the affordable price range. I think that would be something to look forward to. But unfortunately, right now, I think the closest thing you can get is like Model 3 Performance, but that's still a sedan. So I don't know. There's be a little bit of a waiting game for that.
It's a shame, but yeah.
All right. Well, I think that goes with all our questions. Ricky, thank you very much for joining our podcast.
You bet, guys. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I'll be back anytime.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.